London, a city that hides its secrets behind wealth, fog, and concrete. But beneath its polished skyline lies a different world, one built on money, power, and fear. In early 2019, a quiet flight from Eastern Europe touched down at Heathrow. Among the tourists and business travelers was a man carrying nothing suspicious, a single suitcase, a disposable phone, and a photograph folded neatly inside his passport. The face in that photograph belonged to one of London's most notorious underworld figures, a man police knew only as the broker. He controlled millions in narcotics and money laundering networks stretching from the East End to Dubai, and someone had just paid to have him killed. This is the hitman who flew to London to kill a crime boss and failed. The story begins not in London, but 1,200 miles away, in a gray apartment block on the outskirts of Sofia, Bulgaria. Neighbors said the man who lived there kept to himself. He spoke little, paid his rent in cash, and left every morning before dawn. His name, or at least the name on his passport, was Milan Kostov, 42, a former paratrooper turned private security contractor. But police across Europe knew him under another name, the Ghost, a contract killer linked to at least 3 unsolved murders in Germany, the Netherlands, and Serbia. He had been out of sight for years. Then suddenly surveillance picked up activity. New phone numbers, money transfers, a ticket to London purchased under an alias. Interpol flagged the movement, but by the time the alert filtered through, Kostov's plane had already landed. His target, Viktor Markov, known in London's criminal world as the Broker. Markov was a strange figure in organized crime. Born in East London to immigrant parents, he rose through the old dockland smuggling circles of the 1990s. By his 40s, he had evolved into something far more sophisticated, a consultant who connected London's gangs with moneymen in the Balkans and the Middle East. He kept a low public profile. No flashy cars, no social media. He lived in a gated property in Hampstead, traveled with private security, and handled his business through encrypted phones. But underneath the careful image, his empire was crumbling. In late 2018, police disrupted one of his laundering routes, seizing £2.4 million in counterfeit invoices and arresting 2 accountants tied to his companies. Rivals saw weakness. Some wanted his clients, others wanted revenge. Among those rivals was a rising figure from South London, known in the underworld as the Turk, a younger, more ruthless dealer who had lost a shipment in a deal Markov allegedly sabotaged. Weeks later, the order went out. Markov had to disappear, and that order found its way to Milan Kostov. CCTV shows Kostov arriving at Heathrow on a Tuesday morning. He moves calmly through passport control, collects a small suitcase, and exits without drawing attention. In his pocket, investigators later found a piece of paper with an address, a rented flat in Edmonton, North London. From there, the days unfold with quiet precision. He buys a pay-as-you-go SIM, visits a car rental agency, and drives to several locations in the north and west of the city. The pattern is unmistakable to detectives who would later piece it together. He's conducting surveillance. On Thursday, 2 days before the attempted hit, Kostov parks outside a cafe in Golders Green. His camera phone captures footage of a black Mercedes arriving. Markov steps out, flanked by a single guard. Kostov notes timing, routine, and direction of travel. Everything seems to be going according to plan, until the surveillance net he didn't know existed begins to tighten around him. For months, the National Crime Agency had been running a covert operation into Markov's laundering network, codenamed Operation Bryony. Unknown to both Markov and his would-be assassin, investigators had tapped several encrypted devices linked to his business. When one of those phones received a cryptic overseas message, "Delivery confirmed," arrival Tuesday, analysts flagged it. They didn't know the context, but the timing matched Kostov's flight. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Linton, head of the task force, later said, "It was one of those moments when you don't quite know what you're looking at, only that something big is about to happen." Plainclothes officers were quietly deployed near Markov's known haunts, his Hampstead home, his regular gym, and his girlfriend's boutique in Knightsbridge. At 7:15 p.m. on the night of February 23rd, surveillance caught Kostov's rented Ford Focus, pulling into a side street near Markov's gated home. He sat there for 45 minutes, engine running, then drove off. The next night, he came back. Saturday, February 24th. The streetlights flicker under cold drizzle. At 9:07 p.m., Markov's Mercedes returns from a meeting. As the gates open, a dark-clad figure steps from a parked car across the road. Neighbors later describe the scene as something from a film. Silent, fast, mechanical. The figure walks straight toward the driveway, pulling a suppressed handgun from his jacket. But before he can raise it, headlights flare from behind. A second vehicle, unmarked, screeches into view. Armed officers emerge shouting, "Armed police! Drop the weapon!" In that split second, Kostov hesitates, enough for the nearest officer to fire. The bullet strikes the asphalt near his feet. He drops the gun and is tackled to the ground. The operation that took months of monitoring is over in less than 10 seconds. When officers search him, they find 2 phones, 4,000 euros in cash, and a plane ticket for a return flight the following morning. Markov, who had just stepped from his car, stands frozen by the gate. He later tells police he had no idea anyone was after him, a claim few believe. News of the failed hit spreads quickly through London's underworld, but publicly there is silence. No official statement, no press release. The National Crime Agency quietly detains Kostov under terrorism-related provisions to buy time for investigation. Behind closed doors, the interrogation begins. Kostov refuses to speak. No fingerprints link him to prior crimes in the UK, and the weapon, a 9mm Beretta with its serial number filed off, reveals nothing traceable. But analysts working through his phones uncover fragments, encrypted messages, GPS coordinates, and a single photo of Markov's house. The text history includes one phrase repeated in Cyrillic, "Zadela," for the job. Investigators trace the payments back to an offshore account registered in Cyprus, funded by a shell company tied to London businesses owned by the Turk. Still, proving the chain of command is another matter. Markov knows what's happening. Within days of the attempt, he relocates his family abroad and reduces all public movement. In the criminal hierarchy, survival becomes currency, and his surviving the hit elevates his status again. For the Turk, the failure is catastrophic. He owes money to the same investors who financed the hit, and now that money is gone, along with his reputation. Rumors surface that he's fled to Spain, but the real change comes in the alliances that follow. When Markov returns months later, he doesn't come back as the same man. He has new security, new partners, and a new agenda. He begins cooperating quietly with law enforcement, not as an informant, but as leverage, feeding selective intelligence that harms his rivals while protecting his own network. Detectives realize they're now in the middle of a silent war, one that extends beyond London. Forensics teams comb through Kostov's rented flat in Edmonton. What they find turns a simple assassination attempt into an international case. Hidden behind the kitchen kickboard are 3 SIM cards, a disposable USB drive, and a folded blueprint of a warehouse in Barking. Later discovered to be a meeting point for another criminal faction. The implication is chilling. Markov wasn't the only target. Data recovered from the USB contains encrypted files showing payments and travel details for at least 4 other suspected hits across Europe. Kostov appears to have been part of a larger network, one operating under the cover of private security. The National Crime Agency begins coordinating with Europol. Bit by bit, they uncover what appears to be a murder-for-hire syndicate based out of the Balkans, offering logistics solutions to criminal clients. Each job had code names, costs, and completion bonuses. Markov's was listed as London Package, £100,000 on delivery. Weeks pass. Pressure mounts for Kostov to talk, but it isn't the police who finally break the silence. It's fear. After his arrest, Kostov's family back home begin receiving threats. Anonymous calls, vehicles parked near their home. Within a month, his wife and son vanish from Sofia. When police confront Kostov with this information, his resolve starts to crack. He requests witness protection in exchange for cooperation. Over 12 recorded sessions, he details how he was contacted by intermediaries, given cash up front, and instructed to make it look clean, business, not message. He insists he never met the person who ordered the hit. But when investigators cross-reference travel data, they find something startling. A week before the attack, the Turk's lieutenant had traveled to the same city Kostov flew from, on the same day the payment was made. For detectives, it's enough to confirm conspiracy, but not enough for extradition. The case hits a wall of international law and silence. By late 2020, after months of closed hearings, the case finally reaches court. Because so much of the evidence involves classified intelligence and international cooperation, much of it remains under reporting restrictions. Kostov faces charges of conspiracy to murder, possession of a firearm with intent, and money laundering. He pleads guilty to the first two in exchange for protection under a secure unit program. During sentencing, the judge calls it an extraordinary example of organized crime's global reach and of how one miscalculation prevented a bloodbath. Kostov receives 30 years, eligible for parole after 18. He is later transferred to an undisclosed facility under a new identity. But outside the courtroom, the war continues. 6 months after the conviction, an explosion rips through a warehouse in East London, one tied to Markov's old network. Police never confirm a connection, but sources within the NCA call it retaliation dressed as coincidence. By the following year, at least 3 associates of the Turk are found dead in the suspicious circumstances across Europe. Markov's name surfaces in whispers, always indirectly, never proven. Detectives describe the landscape as self-cleaning, criminals eliminating each other faster than the law can intervene. Yet for investigators who worked Operation Bryony, the legacy of the case is more personal. It exposed how modern organized crime uses global systems, travel, finance, technology, to commit local acts of violence. It showed how one man's greed in London could trigger bloodshed in cities thousands of miles away. And it revealed something else. For every assassin caught, another waits in the shadows, ready to finish the job. Amid all the figures and networks, there are quieter stories. Detectives who spent years undercover, now living with the trauma of near misses. Families of victims who never knew why their loved ones were targeted. And even people like Markov, men who built empires on fear but discovered too late that power attracts death. In a rare interview years later, a retired officer who worked the case said, "We used to think London crime was about postcodes and pubs. It isn't anymore. It's boardrooms, encrypted phones, and flights that land quietly in the rain." By 2023, Markov's name had almost vanished from intelligence briefings. He was believed to be living abroad under a false identity. Then late one night, a customs team at Gatwick intercepted a parcel shipped from Eastern Europe. Inside, a phone, a flash drive, and a note written in Cyrillic. Translated, it read simply, "Debt unfinished." The fingerprints on the packaging matched to a known associate of the Turk, a man who had disappeared 3 years earlier. Detectives reopened the case file. A new code name appeared in the system. Operation Marlowe. Somewhere in Europe, someone had decided that the story of the failed hit wasn't over. And for the investigators who thought they had put the case to rest, the message was clear. The ghost hadn't vanished. He was only waiting for the next flight. The London underworld thrives on silence. Deals made in whispers, debts paid in blood. But every so often, one of those whispers becomes a gunshot that echoes across borders. This was one of them. A story that began with a plane ticket and a photograph, and ended with a man in chains, a network in ruins, and a city reminded that crime, like gold, never truly disappears. As for Viktor Markov, his fate remains uncertain. Some say he lives quietly under another name. Others claim he was killed months later in Spain. But one truth remains. In the business of organized crime, survival is never victory. It's just postponement. Until next time, this has been UK Crime Mysteries.